Colleagues, it's now 2:03. I'd like to call this Special Strategic Priorities and Planning Committee meeting. And colleagues, I'll look for a disclosure of pecuniary interest. Seeing none. I have no scheduled items, nothing on the consent agenda, so I look for items for direction. So just to be clear, what we have is the first report of the striking committee who, if I might, you will note that they have gone through and provided recommendations for appointments of the various committees. And at the pleasure of council, we can look for a motion to accept and put on the floor the recommendation of the striking committee, and that can carry. Or should it be your wish, we can deal with any appointments that have been considered or any committees that have been recommended by the striking committee. So what I'd like to do is look for a motion for the first report of the striking committee. Councillor Van Holst, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. Any comments or questions? Councillor Squire.
I would like a vote on one committee, which is the Cycling Advisory Committee. I'm not accepting of that slate.
All right, so like any motion, we can certainly take certain things off and deal with them separately. Happy to do that, sir.
I'd ask that we move the consideration of appointment to the Cycling Advisory Committee off of that item so that we can have a separate vote on the proposed members.
So noted. Any other comments, questions? Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, thank you. I just want to make a comment about the work that the striking committee did here. I really want to give them thanks. There was a lot of work that went into that. I know it helped me not have to go through a lot of resumes and just an understanding on how many people applied. And I just want to make those comments. I'm very open to hearing any other comments from my colleagues as well, such as Councillor Squire. Happy to support that motion as well. But for the rest, happy to second.
So noted. Any other comments? Councillor Pelosa.
Well, I like to stand up and driving all day, if it doesn't bother anybody. I would like item 4.8, the consideration of appointment to the Diversity, Inclusion, and Anti-Oppression Advisory Committee considered separately due to an admission that one of the members have already served 8 years. And I would also like to have that conversation when it comes forward about who we can suggest then to take that position.
Thank you. So noted. Any other comments or questions from colleagues? So what we have is a motion duly seconded, and with thanks to the striking committee for their efforts, but we are removing for separate consideration the details with respect to the Cycling Advisory Committee and Diversity, Inclusion, and Anti-Oppression Advisory Committee. And seeing that, any other discussion? Then let's call, Councillor. No, I was going to say Councillor Moe, but that just doesn't seem right. Councillor Cassidy, please.
Yes, I'm the real Moe, the original Moe. I've been Moe a lot longer than some other people.
Don't say how long.
I'm wondering if the clerks could just explain something to me. At the CAPS meeting last week, we made a motion to defer discussion of the Community Safety and Crime Prevention Advisory Committee to this meeting, right? So is that on the agenda separately? And I apologize because I'm not very well organized today. It's been a rough 3 weeks for me. So is that on the agenda separately, or is that then just lumped into part H of this motion here?
I'll ask the clerk to respond.
Through you, Mr. Chair, it is on the added agenda. So the committee, if you're not taking any particular action with it, you would just receive the communication.
So I wonder then if I could defer item H to later in the added agenda, and we could have that discussion about item H, along with the deferral from CAPS.
4.6 on the agenda, so then that would be a third committee that we are looking to deal with separately. Is that acceptable to our mover and our seconder? So noted, all right. Then any other comments or questions? Seeing none, I'll turn your attention to the screen as we vote. And we will be good with that just now. Just now means later, by the way, although it sounds like it's now, just now. So colleagues, to be clear, when we give you the opportunity to vote, which will be sooner than later, what you will find is we are voting on the recommendations of the striking committee with the exception of 4.6, 4.7, and 4.8. As we turn your attention to the screen now, please.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 13-0.
Thank you, colleagues. Turn your attention to H in the agenda, 4.6 specifically, consideration of appointment to the Community Safety and Crime Prevention Advisory Committee. I believe, Councillor Cassidy, you had some comments with respect to that?
Well, Your Worship, we had the current committee, a delegation from the current committee come to our meeting at CAPS, which is why we deferred it to this meeting, because we knew that all of the advisory committees would be discussed. What did we say? So we just felt that based on the information that they had brought forward, that perhaps it was something that council would want to discuss, whether or not to go with the recommendations from the striking committee for the review period that we're about to go into, or if the committee's the advisory committee's recommendation and request was that we maintain the current makeup their committee, in the words of the delegate, are slightly different from other advisory committees because they have organizational representation. There are 5 members at large, but the vast majority of the members represent the 2 different school boards, representative from Middlesex London Health Unit, representative from other organizations, and in their view, they would lose the kind of community collaboration that they have by having this organizational representation on their committee. The other advantage that they pointed out to us at CAPS was that when the representative from Thames Valley, say, School Board could not be at a meeting, Thames Valley School Board can send an alternate, and that alternate can vote. Whereas if it's all members at large, they don't have, they have issues with quorum that we often see with some of our advisory committees. So I'm just putting that out there. We had a delegation. I'm not sure if everybody was able to see maybe the live stream or something so that they could have heard from. But I understand also that Councillor Squire may have something to add as a former chair of the Thames Valley District School Board.
Pleased to recognize Councillor Squire, who has an opinion on many things. I'm sure this will be.
I have opinion on everything, as my wife will tell you, most of which she ignores. I want to speak to this matter because I think it goes to the essence of what we're trying to do here, and we're either going to do it or we're not going to do it. Up until now, almost every committee has sort of had dedicated seats for people from particular organizations. And quite frankly, that's led to complaints and statements that I've seen that those people, they sit on a committee and they continue their advocacy role that they're doing in the community quite well and quite justifiably at a committee that's supposed to give us advice. The second thing to remember is nobody at all is being excluded from applying to be a member of a committee. This doesn't stop school board members, anyone with a particular interest for applying to these positions. But what it does do is it limits the ability of members of the community who are not involved in those organizations for becoming members of the committee. And that is very important as far as I'm concerned. The second thing is, if you make this change for this committee, how can you not make this change for all? How can you not say, well, if you're going to have people coming back almost immediately saying, well, if you've got appointed positions on this committee, then we want appointed positions on this committee. And if that happens, we've made no change at all. And if that's what we want to do, status quo, business as usual, then let's do that. But I won't be supporting it. The last thing I want to say is Ms. Steele was a former colleague of mine. When she came to speak, what she seemed to be saying is, and what she seems to be, what's saying now at the motion is it's directing that positions be reserved for these certain bodies and that 5 citizens at large be appointed. So you're going to see, in that situation, you're going to see people with appointed from a particular institution are going to have the majority seats on what is a public advisory committee. And for me, that's just not right. The other thing that was said at the meeting is, and this disturbed me very much, well, none of us are reapplying to be on the committee because you're not doing it the way you did it before. I'm not going to buckle under to that. I'm not going to go along and let people say, because you're not doing things the way we want them to be done, I won't be involved. There was also a suggestion that when these people from boards were sitting on committees, they weren't allowed to report back to their boards. And in fact, their boards had told them they couldn't sit on the committees. That disturbs me a lot. If that's happening, that people are not being allowed to go back to other organizations and report. So this may seem somewhat reasonable on the surface, but if you agree with this, you're going to have a much bigger issue with every other committee that's going to want appointed positions, and you're going to really restrict, in my view, the ability of individual citizens who don't sit on on a body to become involved. So I strenuously oppose this suggestion.
So to be clear, for the benefit of all who may not have been at that meeting, but you're recommending the recommendation of the striking committee then?
I am.
And any other comments, or Councillor Van Meerbergen?
Well, I'm coming at this from another perspective. All I see here is this advisory committee has put forward a recommendation to CAPS, which then referred it here. So this is coming not from one person, but from the committee. And all they're basically saying is, let's just leave the thing the way it is while the review takes place. So in other words, they already have a system in place where it's 5 at-large members, and the rest are appointed by their member organization, which includes the police, fire, school boards, and also, very importantly, the parent organizations. This is somewhat of a unique advisory committee. It plans and operates and performs a number of activities that they do with the input of all these people, with all their different perspectives at this advisory committee. So it's a very active committee, does a lot. They make a very valid point that if this moves now to completely member at large, there's no guarantee that there will be proper representation from these vital groups that make up an integral part of this committee. So you could very well have people that have no connection. So again, all they're saying is just leave it alone the way it is until this review is complete. I think it's reasonable.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Pelosi.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The clerk has handed out wording that's before you. It's a motion that I am prepared to move. Having sitting and serving on this committee, having heard their presentation and meeting with them afterwards to make sure that I understood their concerns, that it is a very special committee, bringing different shareholders to the table. And they were asking that since we have a robust review of our committees going on right now, that we just leave theirs be until we have a clear direction of where we're going, that they've brought many people to the table, and if they get to have a hiatus, being many people who have a lot of, they're doers, they're gonna find other things to do, and if we do decide that we like this, set up at this committee, how it's functioning now, and then when we say come back, it might be too late to get some of these voices back to the table in the structure that they have, so I'm just asking the committee, until the clerk's full review is done and that report is back, that this committee is left as it is. We appoint the 5 members today, and then we revisit this once that report comes back.
With respect, Councillor Pelosi, I'll ask colleagues just to bear with me a moment. What I heard, and Councillor Squire, you can confirm that you moved a motion to accept the striking committee. So that is a motion that's on the floor. That would be something contrary to that motion. So I would need a seconder for Councillor Squire's motion. I did allow discussion to carry through because that's always helpful. Is there a seconder for Councillor Squire's motion? Councillor Hillier. So we have that motion on the floor. Are there any other comments or questions with respect to that? Did you have your hand up, Councillor Hopkins?
Yes, I did, Mr. Chair. I do have a question just based on the conversation that I've heard here at committee, and that is, I guess, through you to the clerk, if you could explain exactly what this 2-year review, the process going forward is going to look like?
Would the clerk care to comment on that?
Through the chair, we have brought forward a few interim reports as we continue our work and research. What I expect the report back would look like is a summary of all of the input that we've received from the various committee members. There's been an extensive consultation that's been done, as well as with the civic administration, the organizations that are represented at the various committees, and the elected officials themselves. And we've also undertaken an environmental scan to look at what other municipalities do. So all of that would be included in the comprehensive report.
Clerk, you have another comment?
Through Mr. Chair, just to add that throughout the summer and the fall, we'll be meeting with the advisory committees to get their input with respect to their terms of reference. So that would also be incorporated into the report coming forward.
And so from that, I understand that there'll be opportunities for changes if certain committees aren't working, aren't functioning. Decisions at that time could be made.
Clerk?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, that's correct. The recommendation will come back with any recommended changes as a result of the input from all the stakeholders.
So colleagues, I'd ask always, if you would, as a courtesy, just direct your questions through the chair. Any other comments or questions that we have? Any other comments before the sum up? Councillor Lewis?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Councillor Cassidy wanted to speak too. If she'd like to go first, I'll. Okay. Thank you, Councillor Cassidy, and through you, Chair. My concern with changing this committee right now, I think Councillor Plows has highlighted a couple of important things. I think Councillor Squire actually highlighted a couple of important things too, even though we may not agree on how to proceed with this. I think that our trustee appointees from the school boards need a chance to discuss and sort out with their school boards why they're not being allowed to report. If we remove them from the committee at this time, that discussion sort of ends right there. And I don't think that we're limiting public participation in this advisory committee. When I look through the names of applicants and even the recommendations, you know, right off the top, I identified 4 people who have been recommended for other committees as well. Quite a number of these individuals have applied for and actually been recommended for multiple committees. I don't see how we're limiting public participation if we're allowing multiple committee participation, but saying that we're going to change this. So somebody who's taking up 3 spots on a different committee, on various committees, is limiting public participation just as much as keeping an organizational representation on this particular committee. And I really do think, especially for our school boards, it's important for them to be at the table when we're talking about the Community Safety and Protection Advisory Committee. I just think that they bring a really important perspective to the discussion, and I would hate to see us lose that over a short-term change for the 2 years. So I hope that colleagues won't accept the striking committee's recommendation on this one, and that we can look at other alternatives for this particular committee.
Councillor Mo Cassidy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to the clerk. I'm curious, and you know, I apologize. I know it's been a long process. We've been working through this for quite a while now, and we're at this point where changes are going to happen. But I'm wondering why the decision was made to do these abbreviated terms. If we are pausing while we do this review and redo terms of reference, I'm wondering why this tactic was chosen of disbanding all of the committees and starting with all new members at large. Why it wasn't just, well, let's maintain status quo while we finish up the review process.
You've asked a thoughtful question. Let's see if we can get a thoughtful response from the clerk.
Thank you. Through the chair, back in November of 2018, we brought forward an interim report because it was becoming close to the time of the end of the current appointments. So at that time, council directed that we continue with the existing structure of the advisory committees, the 13 that we have, and that we do so on an abbreviated term in order to allow for the review to be completed. But at the same time, they also directed that a report come back in February, by the end of February, which we almost met. And so we reported back in March of this year with respect to several of the recommendations that came forward to council in the previous term related to the reports of the Diverse Voices for Change. And in consideration of those recommendations, as well as public consultation that was completed in the fall of last year, we brought forward a recommendation to, instead of utilizing the current terms of reference, to offer only voting positions to members at large in order to meet some of the goals of the Diverse Voices for Change recommendations.
Thank you for that. Any other, oh, excuse me, Councillor Kaibaga.
Through you, Chair, I think she just touched a little bit on the question that I had, but I kind of want to go back and ask a similar question than what Councillor Cassidy just asked. Why are we even voting separately on some of these things when we're waiting for the review to come back? Like, why don't we just approve what's here and then wait for the review to come back and go through this process again?
That is certainly the purview of council as opposed to the clerks. I don't know if anyone wishes to respond to that as a query. Councillor Squire has thoughts.
That's our job. This comes to us, and we decide if we're going to approve the list or not, and council has a full right to approve it or not approve it. It's perfectly within the rights of any councillor to say, I like the work that's been done here. I like the names. I'm going to approve them. But some of us don't agree with the work of the committee or may want something different. And that's That's the easiest way to explain it, I think.
Had council accepted all the recommendations? Besides, it would have been a short meeting, and what would we do with that extra time? The clerk has a comment she'd like to make.
Through Mr. Mayor, back, just to add to what Ms. Westlake Powers said, the other reason for the 2-year term was there was a recognition that it was very difficult to go through this process in an election year. And therefore, they wanted the terms to stagger. So if we do 2 years and then the advisory committee terms would then extend beyond a council term, because it is extremely difficult. And I'm not looking for sympathy, but it is very difficult to run a municipal election and try to fill the advisory committee and boards and commissions at the same time.
Duly noted, and my sense is to the questions that are being put forward today, as it relates specifically to this committee of application beyond, so I think this is useful. Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Well, with regard to this one particular committee, they felt so strongly about this, they passed a motion of their entire committee, which was forwarded to CAPS, which again was forwarded here as a referral. To my knowledge, and maybe I'm wrong, no other committee has done that. Is there any other committee that's passed a motion to bring forward to council?
So the question was, I apologize.
Is there another, okay, so this committee has passed, obviously with a majority.
You've asked if another committee has done the same.
Is there another committee that has done the same thing?
I'm not aware, but I'll refer to the clerk on that. Has any other committee's membership come forward with a very specific term of reference recommendation?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the Cycling Advisory Committee also expressed concerns but accepted the process that we're undertaking, acknowledging that they would have input into the review and that they would apply for reappointment again once the review was done. So yes, we did receive inquiries from other committees, but they accepted the process.
So kind of yes, kind of no.
Yeah, so I just want to make it clear. So it wasn't a resolution or a motion that came from that committee. It was some verbal angst, but not put formally to our council.
Clerk?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there was a communication from Mr. Foster from the Cycling Advisory Committee that was placed on an agenda where he expressed some similar concerns.
Again, all I'm stating is that we have a formal motion that came from this.
Councilor Van Meerberg, I just ask you, this is not intended to be
No,
debate.
no, I'm just reiterating.
But ask through me though, please.
Well, Chair,
Just
thank
so
you
that we
very much.
Yeah, okay, there you go.
Again, I'm simply saying, Chair, that they feel very strongly at this committee. I think it's well established that what they do is quite unique within the umbrella of advisory committees. And I think their ask is really not that unreasonable, just to let them have status quo for the remainder with their 5 at large and the rest appointed from these member organizations.
So noted. Thank you, Councilor Cassidy.
So I have one more question for the clerk through you, Mr. Mayor. Is it possible when the review is complete that we could go back to, again, having a certain number of members at large on this committee and then a certain number of organizations, or will it always be members at large? I'm just looking for, going forward, what the plan is.
To the clerk.
Through you, Your Worship, at this point in time, there's been no changes to the terms of reference. The motion that was passed by council was notwithstanding the current terms of reference, that the abbreviated term be populated with members at large only.
So Mr. Mayor, I'm a little torn on this one, and I recognize that we've set a process in place, and I recognize the importance of process. I recognize also as well that this has been a very, very dedicated committee. Again, turnover is probably helpful in most committees, and we need new ideas and fresh blood and that sort of thing. But this committee has really accomplished a lot in the City of London, and they've accomplished what they've done through collaboration and through the collaboration of their members who represent other organizations. So as I said, I'm torn here. I have not made my mind up at this point in time. You know, they've been involved in things like active and safe routes to school, actually bringing these things to life, active and safe routes to school and the school travel planning committees. They have the Community Safety Week every week. They've been very closely affiliated with Neighborhood Watch, and when it was still around, with the Block Parent Program. So I have seen the really good work that they've done. I've seen the dedication of these members. I'm concerned if it's a whole brand new slate and we don't have existing, then the new terms of reference would not see the value, might not recognize the value in having these other organizations as members of this committee representing their organization. So I'm going to listen, see if anybody else has anything to say. I'll listen to Councillor Squire's sum up, and I'm leaning towards supporting this committee and what they're asking us to do.
Well, there has been no shortage of views. Are there any others? So colleagues, what we are, oh, Councillor Hopkins, I'm sorry I missed you through the left side of my eye.
Always to the left. I just wanted to ask another question here, because I'm very torn. I know the work that this committee does. I'm concerned on sort of setting a precedent for one committee and then what happens with our other committees. And so my question is, how different is this slate that is being suggested by the striking committee to the committee that already is existing? Is it a completely new slate?
I'm not in a position to respond to that, Clerk. Why don't we start with Councillor Squire, and then we can refer to the clerk, if that's right.
I did say this. I'm going to get a chance to sum up and repeat everything I said before, since it's all been sort of misrepresented through the debate. So all of the members from the previous committee refused to reapply because they didn't like the fact that their positions were not reserved. That was stated by Ms. Steele. She said, we will not apply to this committee because you've changed the way it's being done. It's not that they were refused. It's not that they weren't chosen. It's that they refused to apply.
And said with passion. Clerk, did you have some comment you wanted to add?
Through the chair, I have not reviewed the applications of the individuals who've applied or been recommended. However, there are 2 that are being recommended for appointment who are currently on the committee. They're the only 2.
And they are the only 2 that applied, just to say that through the microphone. I'm sorry, was there another question with that, Councillor Hopkins? I didn't want, okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions? I guess that means if you're to the left, that would mean that Councillor Hillier is to the far left. I don't know what that means. Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you. I won't comment about my position. This represents a dilemma for us. I'm, in one hand, happy to try out something new and see, and then we can find out how it works. On the other hand, I can imagine that some of the committee members might want access to those groups when they're having discussions. I recall back when we were doing the Community Economic Roadmap, I had a little group that was assigned the task to make comments about what we should do with education, but nobody at our table was from the educational institution, so there was little we could have to say. However, so there's the other side of the coin. However, I think I might be more inclined to just go with the recommendations of the striking committee and our interim strategy. And if it's a problem, we'll find out for sure. And I think there's probably other ways that these organizations could bring their input in if needed.
Thank you. I'm also advised that anyone can act as a resource or in a consulting capacity in a non-voting way, and that's not limited or restricted. I just thought I would share that for the benefit of all colleagues. Councillor Van Meerbergen, you have another word.
Yeah, the information I received on this is certainly with regard to the school boards, is if they're representing the school boards, they have to be appointed by the school boards. They can't be just a member at large and then say, you're going to represent the school board. They have to be appointed by the school board to work on behalf of the school board at this particular committee, subject, of course, to confirmation by council.
Thank you. Before I ask Councillor Squire to sum up Are there any other comments or questions? Councillor Squire.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I may appear agitated, and it's because, as happened at last council and often happens, I try to state facts, things I know, things I was in attendance for, things I saw, things I heard. And then as steadily as we move around the table, not only do people say things that aren't factual and aren't accurate, with all due respect, but then they start saying what I said and interpret what I said. So let me just go back, and here's what the situation is. We have a committee that has 15 people on it. Out of those 15 positions, 10 are taken up by positions that are by the nature of what you're doing, okay? So the school board gets a position, other people get a position. So there is only, and this goes to Councillor Lewis's point that he seemed to be taking exception with my public participation issue. That means that only 5 people out in the community in any given time frame can join this committee. So if you're interested in this committee, you effectively can't join unless you're one of the 5. And just take note this year that 15 people have come forward and said they want to do the work on this committee. Yes, they're new. Yes, they're not the people who were there before. You know what? They might come with new ideas, new input. And we're giving people a chance to belong to a committee. And that's been the primary thing I have heard from people is when you have this many reserved positions on a committee, it limits the ability of members of the public to sit on those committees. And it clearly does here because only 5 people can sit. So what we're going to have to do now, please keep in mind that if we change this, the clerk's going to have to go out and tell some members of the public, yes, you came forward in good faith using the present system that we endorsed as a council to try and become a member of a committee. But you know what? We're not going to use the system that we voted on and endorsed. We're going to go back to it. We're going to use the old system. So you lose, you're not on the committee. That's what we're doing. So we're not punishing the present members. We're hurting people who want to get involved in civics. The last thing I want you to say is it was very clear to me when Ms. Steele was here, and I'm glad to see at least 2 former members of the 15 said we'll come back on. She said they've organized what in effect is a boycott of this committee because they didn't like the way it is. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. They aren't being removed from the committee. They aren't being told they can't. And I suspect if they reapplied, they would have gotten on the committee. And this idea, because you're a school board member and you serve on this committee, you can't act like a school board member and you can't go back and report to the school board is, I don't want to use too strong a language, but it's just not factually accurate. It's not factually accurate. You know, do you think any of us go to a meeting or go somewhere and don't tell them we're a city councillor and don't tell them our point of view has been tempered by our experience as a city councillor? The other thing is, if we do this and we go back to the system of reserved spots, that's fine. But just keep in mind, you've decided to go back to this system where members of the public are going to have difficulty joining committees where there is this kind of a number of reserved spots, 10 out of 15 spots. And when people say, well, they did a very good job, so you should let them stay on, well, how about we let someone else do a good job? How about we let someone else get involved in civic politics for a change?
So noted, colleagues. That concludes the discussion on the motion put forward, duly seconded, and that is to accept the recommendation of the striking committee by voting yes. You have accepted the recommendation of the striking committee. If voting no, the opposite is true. As I turn your attention to the screen.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 10-3.
Thank you, colleagues. I'll now turn your attention to 4.7, consideration of appointments to the Cycling Advisory Committee, and that'll be open for discussion. Colleagues, I just have to advise you that in 10 minutes I have a delegation from India coming into my office, and I've asked if this meeting will certainly go beyond the next 10 minutes. I've asked Councillor Hopkins to chair the balance of the meeting. That's why I asked Councillor Hopkins. Oh, you mean at the other meeting? Yeah. That's very thoughtful. Thank you. So we have We have we've been asked by, it would be Councillor Squire, I believe, to take the Cycling Advisory Committee into this component of the agenda, so it can be spoken of separately.
Yeah.
Do you have a motion you're looking to recommend?
I just want to nominate another person for the committee. The advisory committee has recommended 11 members. I have a person whose name I want to speak to, who I think should be on the committee and wasn't considered.
Was that person's name put forward? Did that person put their name forward?
Yes, they did.
And the striking committee did not?
That's exactly right.
So can I ask a question? Maybe this is a process just for my edification. 11 names have been recommended for the 11 positions. I don't believe that we are asking that that this be a 12-person committee. Therefore, is there a suggestion that we are voting on if accepted the 12th and or whatever numbers that are? And so we will rank that in whatever fashion that we do.
That is what would have to happen, yes.
So would you care to put that name forward?
Jameson Roberts. So my motion is that he be added to the list of people to be considered despite or in spite of the striking committee's recommendation.
All right, and is there a seconder for that? Councillor Lewis, comments, questions? Councillor Hopkins?
Okay, so this becomes a problem for me because I've been approached by people that were disappointed that they weren't recommended by the striking committee. And listening to the conversation to date, I think it's really important for me to listen to what the striking committee is doing and the work moving forward. So there's going to be opportunities, most likely through the process, that there'll be availability to sit on other committees as people come and go. So I won't be supporting the recommendation to have another person added.
Any other comments or questions? To be clear, what the motion is to put a 12th name on 11-person committee. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Sully?
Just to clarify, you're not expanding the membership to 12 people. We're going to rank ballot it after. And and not to go further, but does the councillor have someone in mind to remove in that place? I don't think we need to really sit here and do an entire rank ballot if it's just, there's a swap out, but that's just me.
I don't think it's the pleasure of the councillor to recommend someone's name be withdrawn. This is somewhat different from just to be clear, somewhat different from the last motion that we passed the recommendation of the striking committee. So if there's no other commentary, and there is a mover and a seconder to be clear, if we accept that this additional person be added to the considered list, we have 12 individuals put forward, 11 to be selected, so we would go through a ballot. If you turn down the recommendation, the 11 of the as recommended by the striking committee stand. Any other comments or questions? Then I will turn your attention to the screen as we vote on Councillor Squire's motion.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 8-5.
Based on that, we have a vote. So I will look to the clerks to provide that for us, please.
Through the chair, we will be a few minutes printing up a ballot for you. We're ready, but they need to be printed. So if it's the pleasure of the committee, we would move on to the next item and then we'll circle back for the ranked ballot to be circulated.
Any objection from colleagues to do that? So we'll carry the meeting forward and move to 4.8 or J, which is the consideration appointment of the Diversity, Inclusion, and Anti-Oppression Advisory Committee. I see no objections to that, so we'll ask the clerk to proceed with that, and then we will return and vote on 11 of the 12. I am going to, as we open this up, and this was Councillor Pelosi who brought this forward, I will ask in a moment for her to comment, but with apologies, colleagues, I do have an appointment that I was unable to change, and ask your indulgence as I ask Councillor Hopkins to take the chair, please. And if you applaud wildly for her, she likes that, actually. So, Councillor Hopkins, if you would, please.
So just moving forward, we're going to be looking at 4.7, which is the consideration of appointment to the Cycling and Advisory Committee? No, 4.8. 4.8, sorry, I was thinking, boy, I think we just did that. And we'll be voting on that to come. So moving forward to the 4.8, consideration of appointments to the Diversity, Inclusion, and Anti-Oppression Advisory Committee. Councillor Pelosi pulled this item? Or Councillor Kawabanga? Yes.
Sorry, thank you, Madam Chair. So looking at Diversity, Inclusion, and Anti-Oppression Committee, in that the terms of service are 8 years, and it's capped at 8 years, and one of the members who is recommended has now completed their 8-year terms, so that's Rifat Hussain. So I'm asking that we remove that name because they're not eligible because they've actually served the maximum allowable, and that we appoint a replacement if it's with the will of the committee, that there are 2 people who have that as their only selection of a committee to serve on that did not make the selection process, that I would move that we move both of their names to the ballot, and we would consider that fairly, being Leroy Osborne or Shobita Sharma.
Can I have those names again, please?
That'd be Leroy Osborne and Shobita Sharma.
And the name that we are removing?
Rafeet Hassan.
Okay, from what I can see is that she is not being recommended by the striking committee?
Yes, she is.
She is? So she's going to be removed and 2 names being added. And I'm looking for a seconder. Councillor Kawabanga, or Councillor Hillier, seconded. Councillor Kawabanga.
Thank you. Can we also vote on the removal of the name as well, since, or are we just gonna have like a ranked ballot and choose who we want to put on the, how are we gonna proceed with this?
If I could ask the clerk what the process will be?
Through the acting chair, I don't have the resolution typed up yet, but I understand the recommendation to be the removal of consideration of Rifat Hussain and the addition of Leroy Osborne and Shobita Sharma to the slate of considered nominees.
Councillor Kawabanga?
Can we separate that then, where there's maybe, we can vote on A, adding Shobita and Leroy, and then B, removing Rafeet? I'd like to vote separately. I'd like to vote against removing Rafeet. Thank you.
So this is the motion, the mover and the seconder. I understand that the mover would like to make a comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and just through you to the clerk for clarity, as per our general policy of advisory committees, as item 4.6 limits the length of service to two full terms, and if this individual has surpassed it, it would be my understanding that they're ineligible, and it wouldn't even be, I'm not sure how their names managed to get to our list if they're actually ineligible for this opportunity.
I'd like to go to the clerk.
Through you, Madam Chair, they passed a motion saying notwithstanding the term limited, that they reappointed, would have her appointed again. The conversation that took place at the committee meeting was that there were a number of new members being appointed, and there was some desire to have some transition over the shorter term. And that has been done before in the past. You'll see there's a number of notwithstanding clauses here for, so that was the discussion that took place at the committee meeting.
Councillor Pelosa, are you fine with that? I'd like to go to Councillor Sally.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm confused if there was a notwithstanding recommendation. So I don't think, because we already have, and maybe I'll look to Councillor Morgan, but don't we have to rank ballot it regardless then? And not just vote on one person, whether to remove them or not. I believe we have to then do a rank ballot, because that's why we're doing it for this other advisory committee. But if not, it just seems out of order. So that's my question through you.
If I can go to the clerk.
Through the acting chair, it's up to the committee how they establish the slate of nominees. So there's a recommendation from the striking committee, and in the previous consideration of committee appointments, they added to that slate of proposed nominees, resulting in a ranked ballot. So it's the committee's purview. They can do it either way.
Councillor Sally, are you okay with that?
So I would prefer then to do it as a ranked ballot if you're gonna do it that way, as much as I don't want to do it, because I know it'll take more work. But it just seems odd to just do one way for one vote and then another for another. It just seems, and then I guess depending on how this motion goes, then I'll maybe come back and speak to the decision if it's just one person. But if they're gonna come back and make it ranked, then I won't speak. But if it's not, then I'll speak again.
I understand it is up to the mover and the seconder to do the ranked voting. And before I go there, I'd like to continue with my list. Councillor Cassidy.
Okay, I have concerns. And, you know, Councillor Squire spoke on our last item about the process, and that we put this process in place and we should follow this process. And I ended up voting along in favor of Councillor Squire's motion, because he's correct. We set up, strike that from the record if you could. We set this process in place, and we set up this striking committee to make recommendations to us. And the reason, especially on this particular item, that I don't think we should change anything is because the striking committee has information that we do not have. So some of the people that put their names forward may have been on the committee at one time or another. And all sorts of factors came into play when the striking committee made their recommendations. One of those items was attendance. As a member of a standing committee that receives reports from advisory committees, I can't tell you how many times we get a report from an advisory committee that says the meeting was adjourned because there was no quorum. So we're not privy to all of that information. They've been very respectful to not disparage anybody publicly. But I'm saying there are all sorts of different factors that went into the choosing of these members. And I really don't think we should micromanage this or second guess this. I think we should go along with what the striking committee is recommending to us.
Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm inclined to move that we accept the other 10 nominations as a first step, and not, that would save us from doing a ranked ballot, which or at least give us a ranked ballot with only 3 people on it. So I'd like to make that motion if it's in order.
I think there's already a motion being prepared, and right now I understand we have the recommendation from the striking committee, or we have a motion that is already proposed. I think we should stay with that. Are you suggesting?
Okay, I'm sorry, was the striking committee's motion on the floor now?
The striking committee's recommendations are here already for us to accept or not. There is a motion to have 1 name removed, 2 added, and I will go back to the mover and the seconder to see if they want to have it ranked. That's what I understand the motion is at the moment. If you're suggesting another motion, I think we'll deal with this first motion that we have in place.
Okay, as a point of clarification, maybe through you to our clerks, can you tell us what motion is on the floor? If there's no motion, I shall make one.
If I could go to the clerk, please.
Thank you. Through the chair, the motion that is currently on the floor is moved by Councillor Pelosa and seconded by Councillor Hillier. I believe it's up on display now, and it is with respect to amending the slate of nominees for this particular committee. What committee could do is table this motion and introduce a alternate motion and then go back to this if they were so inclined. But that is what is on the floor at this moment.
And if I could go to...
Okay, thank you. Well, then I'll move that we table that motion. I just want to avoid a ranked ballot of 10 people and all that work when really it's just only this one.
To remove the first. Thank you, Councillor Van Holst. There is Councillor Lewis, if I could go to you next on the list.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And through you, I just have a process question to staff, because I would prefer to have a full ranked ballot, to be honest. I think that we've got some committee members who've done some excellent work, and I appreciate Councillor Cassidy's comments about the striking committee having information that we do not. That's very important to my thought process. But in the terms of reference for the striking committee, I'm just wondering how they were informed or directed that they actually had a notwithstanding clause power to exceed the policies. I'm just wondering how that came about.
I'll go to the clerk.
Through you, Madam Chair. There's no written policy, but it has been the practice in the few previous years that people were appointed, notwithstanding the term limit, based on factors that came to their attention, such as too many new members, wanting a transition, perhaps the performance of some of the applicants who were asking to be returning, and also because of lack of applications. So it has been done in the past, so that's why they continued that practice.
And are there any further questions from committee? Councillor Morgan.
First off, I wonder if the chair can clarify what we're actually on right now. I know someone made a motion to table. I understand the motion that was on the floor before. I just want to know what we're actually debating at this moment.
If I may, there is a motion on the floor. I would assume that's the motion that we're speaking to. I did hear from Councillor Van Holst, who was okay with that motion once he read it. That's what I understand. The motion is A, to have Rafid Hussain removed, and B, to add Leroy Osborne and Shabita Sharma to be added to the slate of nominees. That's where we're at right now. I understand it is up to the mover and the seconder if they want to introduce a ranked balloting process, but for now, the motion is in front of us.
Yes, and with the utmost respect, I don't think it's up to the mover and the seconder to determine the process. I think the mover and the seconder have moved a motion. I believe they want to vote on it as an A and a B separately, because some people will have a problem removing an individual, some people are happy to add others. I think at that point, then council can make the following determination. We will have a slate of nominees that is greater than the committee. We can then decide whether we want to have a decision-making process like a preferential ballot. I'm not calling it a ranked ballot anymore because it's not really a ranked ballot. To narrow down our options, at which point then we usually vote to ratify that. In other words, it's just a tool to help us narrow down the options, and then we have a vote on the final slate. It's also could be considered that at the point where we have a nominated slate that is larger than the committee, that someone could move to, notwithstanding the size of the committee, that we appoint all of them, right? So I think that we want to determine the order that we want to do this in so that people are very clear. So my preference would be to proceed in the way that that was suggested before, and that's we've got a motion, someone wants to vote on it first and second. At that point, we would have a slate of nominees that is too large for the current committee, and we would decide what to do at that point when someone wants to make a motion, either to have a larger committee or narrow it down through a voting process.
Thank you, Councillor Morgan, for your suggestions, and I will go to the mover and the seconder. I understand that A would be voted on separately and then B moving forward. If I understand Councillor Morgan's suggestion, I'll go to the mover and seconder first. Councillor Pelosa.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to the rest of the committee for allowing this side discussion to happen as we're just working our way through things. I respect the committee's recommendation of what they want, certainly acknowledging too that they have attendance records and more information. And certainly I know several of the candidates who didn't make the committee myself and know them to be amazing people. And I look forward to getting to know the other people. Respectfully, I and my seconder remove my motion that's been put forward, and we'd like the slate to stand in its entirety as originally presented.
So I understand that you are removing your motion then. Councillor Cassidy.
I'd like to move the striking committee recommendation.
And I'm looking for a seconder in Councillor Van Hulst. Thank you for that. And the motion is to be voted on. Any further questions? No. Please look for the motion.
I'll vote manually, yes. My screen is frozen here.
Councillor Cassidy votes yes.
Closing the vote, and that motion is passed, 11-0.
So thank you, committee. Moving back then to the cycling committee, which is 4.7, and we have names of the cycling advisory committee. And if you could fill out your ballot, and the clerk will be by to pick it up if there's any questions from the committee. I see none. Councillor Lewis?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just for clarification on the ballot, do we need to rank these, or are we simply indicating our 11 preferred candidates?
I understand we should be ranking them, there's 11 candidates. There's 12, and we should have 11. Councillor Pelosi?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Having bad flashbacks to last time we attempted this, can one put down the number 1 beside all 11 candidates, or we have to use numbers 1 through 11 without interfering with the system so it's not off-weighted again?
I would go to the clerk. I do have a suggestion. I think we should have some consistency. So if we all, if we pick 11, I think we should be aware that we should be picking 11. And if we are in disagreement with that, we could have that conversation. I'm just going to wait for the clerk's response. Councillor Kayabaga.
Thank you. I just wanted to just make sure we're doing the right thing. We're ranking from 1 to 12 and not 1, 1, 1, because some people are asking if they could just put the number 1 next to the candidates that they prefer, which is sort of bridging the system, right? So I think if you're gonna rank, you need to rank number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, all the way to 12. Don't put number 1 and 2 all the way through. It's just gonna play with the system.
Councillor Morgan.
Okay, I'm gonna be blunt on this one. This is why we screw it up, is because we don't agree on how we're gonna do this ballot. And this is why it goes very badly, and then we have negative media stories about our process. So I'm gonna be clear what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna rank them 1 to 12, because then there's a process by which the clerks can eliminate and figure out who was the last person. If you don't do that, I'm gonna vote against the ratification vote. I'm gonna vote against it, because I'm not accepting the process if we don't do it in a fair way. Because it's not worth doing if we don't do it in a fair way. So rank 1 to 12. If you don't wanna do that, that's fine, it's your choice. But I'm voting against the ratification vote if you do anything but that.
Any other questions? So there is a suggestion that we rank from 1 to 12. Councillor Kayabaga? If I could go to the clerk for a comment as well.
Through Madam Chair, yes, I would concur with Councillor Morgan's advice, because if, as Ms. Westlake Power said, if we have a tie and everybody ranks them 1, then we're not going to be able to determine who had the most votes. So I would hope that you would rank them 1 to 12.
Councillor Cassidy.
So I'm just going to explain what I'm going to do. I'm going to rank according to Councillor Morgan's impassioned speech, but I'm going to respect the opinion and the advice from the striking committee. So the new name that has been added, I will be ranking that person 12. I don't have resumes in front of me. I don't have information on these individuals. I have no clue how to rank them. I'm just going to go 1 from the top and all the way down, but the new name, I will be ranking number 12.
Any other questions? Counselor Van Holst.
I'll likely be ranking them 1, 1, 1, 1, and 2 for the added individual as my means of dealing with the fact that I prefer the striking committee's strategy.
Counselor Kayabaga.
This is exactly why I brought this up, because I heard people say that they're gonna be voting 1, 1, 1, which plays with the system that we're trying to do. We're trying to rank. You rank, there's 12 candidates, you rank from 1 to 12, not 1, 1, 1, 1. So just like Councillor Morgan just said, I will not be ratifying this if we are voting, we're voting however we feel like vote. That's a spoiled ballot. Actually, we should spoil it. Spoil the ballots that are ranking the wrong way. The system is that we rank people from number 1 to 12, and that's what we've been doing for a while now. And if someone is going to play with the system, we should just spoil the ballot, just like how someone goes to vote and they're not voting according to the directions that they've been given. It's a spoiled ballot. We should spoil that so that we don't have to waste a lot of time coming back to do this again. That's exactly why I brought this up, because I heard people were going to do that.
Thank you for your comments. I will go to you, Councillor Van Holst, but I would like to remind the committee on a few comments that have been made by the committee, in particular, the importance that if we do have a strategy that we all sort of use the 1 to 12. I'll go back to you, Councillor Van Holst.
I think Councillor Kayabaga has made a great suggestion. If we've decided on a method and that's not what happens, that could be a spoiled ballot.
Thank you for that. So if I could have all members rank their ballots, I will go to Councillor Morgan.
I'm going to move a motion that says, and I hope Councillor Kayabaga will second it, that only ballots that are ranked 1 to 12 and fully completed will be tallied by the clerks and communicated back. Okay, fine. What if the ratification is the vote? The vote is actually the ratification. It makes no sense to go through the process if people are going to do different things in the process. We may as well not do it. If everybody's, because you're basically then choosing different voting systems. So what I'm trying to do is we decide on what we're going to do and then we do it, right? Because it doesn't make any sense if we all do something different. I can't tell you how much, it doesn't make any sense for everybody to be voting differently.
I think I understand what you are saying. Councillor Morgan has a motion. Is there a motion on the floor for that? Or there's a comment. Councillor Kayabaga.
I know the Councillor Morgan would like me to second that, but I think it would prevent us in the future. Let's say someone voted up to 11 candidates. The person they didn't vote for is still 12. Or like we did in the past where people voted for 6 people when we were not aware that we had to rank everyone. And it's still, for the person that you choose not to vote for whatever reason that you may have, will get the number 12 because that's how the system is. So limiting how many people you can vote for or not vote for, that motion may be contradictory in the future. So I just think that we should just spoil the ballots that are not properly ranked and continue with the ranked ballots and the ones that make sense.
Thank you. I would like to, before I go to Councillor Morgan, again, remind the committee that we have a consensus here that we all vote the same way. I thought we started off doing that, and now I think we're going backwards. I'm a little disappointed that we're going backwards, but I would like to remind the committee that we should have a consensus here, and the consensus, from what I understood, was that we would all rank from 1 to 12. Councillor Morgan.
Yes, let me tell you what's going to happen if we don't make it definitive. Someone ranks 1s all the way down. The way that the clerks have tallied this before is they add up the sum of the numbers. So everybody, whoever ranks 1s all the way down is going to get low numbers all the way, and then whoever's their 2 is going to get a 2, and their vote is really not going to matter very much in this because all of the 12s and the other numbers that we put in are going to outweigh those. And I'm only saying that because that is the way that the clerks have counted it time and time and time again. So that is why the system fails, is because it makes no sense to count ballots that way. So what we have is no actual process that council has decided on for making this decision. So if we don't provide any clarity to the process now, we're just basically guessing how it's going to happen. So if we all vote differently, then that's a problem. So rank them 1 to 12. I don't care if my motion wasn't there. I'll just vote against the ratification vote, but just rank them 1 to 12. We're all doing the same thing. That would be fine. I'm just asking my colleagues to do that.
And just before I go to Councillor Cassidy, I would like to remind the committee that we do have a planning committee here that starts at 4 o'clock as well. Councillor Cassidy.
If Councillor Morgan still wants his motion to go forward, I'll second it.
Councillor Morgan, do you have a motion?
Yes, that the clerk will only tally ballots that have a full ranking of 1 to 12
And I have a secondary, Councillor Cassidy.
for this vote today. Not binding in the future, for this vote today.
And a secondary in Councillor Cassidy. So we have a motion on the floor. Questions? Councillor Sully.
I just have to ask, so I love it, I'm so happy to support it in spirit. I just want to confirm, am I able to do that from the clerk's end? Like, can I stop a counselor from voting essentially? Is that what that would mean? I just wanted to confirm so I don't, because if a counselor chooses still to spoil their ballot, am I then denying that counselor?
If I could have a response from the clerk.
Through the chair, I'm very uncomfortable with the motion. I acknowledge that the actual vote is at the end where you're ratifying, but it is part of the process to get to the vote, to the ratification. So I'm not comfortable discounting someone's ballot because that leads to the ultimate vote at the end.
Councillor Cassidy.
Do we not have rules around how we vote on other things? For example, I am not allowed to recuse myself from a vote. I must do a vote of yes or no. So there are other rules around voting.
So we have a motion that is for just this matter only. And if we have no further questions, I see none, please vote.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 9-2.
So we have our ranked ballots in front of us. We are ranking them from 1 to 12. The clerk will be around to pick them up. And I guess it will just take us a few minutes to get the results from the clerk. I would like to make a comment, though. I know this, the way we do our rank balloting has been referred to the government's committee to deal with the right procedure, so hopefully this will not happen again. And we're almost close to getting the results of the right procedure. I wonder if I could just go to the committee while we're waiting for the results to move on to the deferred matters, additional business, 5.1. We do have an added Community Safety and Crime Prevention Advisory Committee referral. We do have to receive it, so I would look for a motion, Councillor Lewis and Councillor Hillier to second that we are receiving the added.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 11-0.
Thank you. I'd like to go to the clerk while we're waiting for the results from the rank balloting.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to say a few words about the striking committee. They worked very, very hard. They went through a first round, and then were careful to go back and make sure that as many people as possible that applied were recommended for appointment to at least one committee. They cross-referenced and we reached out to some people to see if they were willing to sit on two committees because we didn't have enough applications. So they were very thoughtful with their process and spent a lot of time on it. And I just wanted to express from the staff perspective my appreciation for the hard work and the time that they took to very carefully review all of the applications.
Thank you for those comments, and I just would like to add, again, the work that the striking committee has saved us as a council is acknowledged and thanked. I wonder if the committee would like to recess for 5 minutes. Councillor Lewis, do I need a motion for that? And I need a seconder, Councillor Cassidy. All in favor, hand vote. Thank you. Okay.
Just about. Do you have the vote?
Welcome back, committee. We do have the results for the rank balloting that we had for the cycling committee. I'd like to go to the clerk. Michael?
Thank you. Through the chair, I do have the results of the ranked or the preferential voting, as Councillor Morgan puts it. Kate Braun, Ben Cowie, Christopher DeGroot, Rebecca Henderson, Benjamin Hill, Jason Jordan, Craig Linton, Chris Pollitt, Ernie Raftis, Jamie Robertson, and Olivia Toth. There was one ballot that was not in compliance pursuant to the motion that was passed earlier.
I know there is going to be a motion before us. And just before we look at the results, I guess I will look for a mover and a seconder. I need a mover and a seconder to accept this motion. And I understand there's a mistake in the spelling of one of the names that will be corrected. Councillor Cassidy.
I'm just want to say that I'll be voting against this slate because it is different from what was recommended by the striking committee.
Councillor Hillier. Councillor Calbaga. Oh, so we have a mover in Councillor Calbaga and seconded by Councillor Hillier. Any further comments? I see none. Please vote.
I apologize, Your Chair. Is it possible to see the actual vote totals before I complete my voting?
I think it is. Just a moment. We could put it up on the screen. Yep, we're just waiting for the results to appear on the screen. I can see that the results are on the screen. It may need to be adjusted slightly. I see no questions, and I'd like to go to the clerk for the results.
Through the chair, I'm still waiting for some votes. Councillor Salee, Councillor Morgan.
Just an observation through the chair. Keep in mind that the columns, you have to look at the first name and then look at the first set of numbers.
Any questions from the committee? Oh, if we can have the results appear on the screen, please.
I just want to see them again.
If we could have the results appear on the screen, please.
Okay. So in looking at the results, I really think colleagues should look carefully at your votes. For example, there's a colleague who added someone to the list and then voted for that person last. That may have been what happened, but just want to make sure that you realize that that's how the votes were. So you might want to just make sure that your ballot looks like how you cast it.
Councillor Cassidy.
Okay, I would like to know which numbers are mine, because they're not the ones that are under my name.
Through the chair. So if you look at the first column, for example, Councillor Lewis starts with a 10. Councillor Sally starts with a 10. Cassidy, 1. Squires, 6. It's just the way that it printed coming out of Excel, unfortunately. So it's skewed slightly. We just need to center the names, but they're correct.
That explains a lot of the concern that I've seen around this horseshoe. So thank you for that explanation. So we have a motion on the floor to accept the striking committee's suggestions, or the... sorry, the motion is before us. You either support the rank balloting results or not.
Closing the vote, the motion is passed 6-5.
I am looking for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Pelosi, second by Councillor Hillier. All those in favor? Thank you.